The moment I confessed the truth, the entire backyard seemed to fall silent. Sunlight filtered through the maple trees, children laughed near the garden fence, and relatives carried plates of food across the bright green lawn, yet all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Across the patio table, Maris Calder slowly lifted her tear-filled eyes to mine. She had spent years pretending my presence did not affect her, and I had spent even longer pretending I had never noticed. But that afternoon, with my former fiancée standing only a few yards away and half her family gathered around us, I finally said the words that had haunted me for nearly a decade. I told Maris that my greatest regret was not choosing her when I had the chance. Her cheeks turned pink, her fingers trembled around the glass in her hand, and then she whispered something that changed the rest of my life. She told me I still could. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth if you believe kindness can heal old wounds and that everyone deserves a second chance. My name is Callum, and for most of my adult life, I believed regret was simply the price people paid for making difficult decisions. I told myself everyone carried a few mistakes into middle age, tucked away like faded photographs in a drawer. Mine had a name, though I rarely allowed myself to say it. Maris had been the younger sister of my former fiancé, Sloane, and from the first day we met, she had possessed a quiet warmth that made people feel seen. She was not the loudest person in a room, nor the kind who fought to be admired. She simply noticed things. She noticed when my coffee had gone cold during long family dinners and replaced it without asking. She noticed when I became overwhelmed at crowded gatherings and found some harmless excuse to lead me outside. She remembered the anniversary of my father's death even after Sloane had forgotten. For years, I dismissed those small acts as kindness because admitting they meant more would have forced me to confront a truth I was too afraid to face. Sloane was everything I thought I was supposed to want. She was charismatic, ambitious, polished, and impossible to overlook. When she entered a room, people turned their heads. When she spoke about the future, she described penthouses, promotions, expensive vacations, and a life that looked impressive from the outside. I was 27 when we became engaged, working long hours at an architectural firm and desperate to prove that I was building a successful life. Sloane fit perfectly into the image I had created. Maris did not. Maris worked at a community arts center, taught painting classes to children, wore old sneakers stained with color, and measured success by whether the people she loved felt safe around her. Back then, I confused excitement with compatibility and appearance with happiness. I chose the woman who looked right beside me instead of the woman who made me feel like myself. The first time I understood that I might be making a terrible mistake happened on a bright Saturday morning 3 months before the wedding. Sloane had cancelled a meeting with the caterer because an influential client had invited her to a networking brunch. I had driven to the family home alone, embarrassed and irritated, only to find Maris repainting an old wooden bench in the backyard. She looked up, saw the disappointment on my face, and quietly offered me a brush. For nearly 2 hours, we worked beneath the warm spring sun. She did not criticize her sister or ask invasive questions. She simply stayed beside me while I admitted that the wedding felt less like the beginning of a marriage and more like the launch of a business partnership. Maris listened, then reminded me that love should feel like a place where a person could rest, not another stage on which they had to perform. I remember looking at the yellow paint on her cheek and experiencing a terrifying sense of peace. For one breathless moment, I imagined choosing a completely different life, but fear can be louder than truth. I told myself I was nervous because the wedding was approaching. I told myself Maris was merely compassionate. I told myself loyalty meant ignoring every warning inside me. The wedding never happened anyway. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Sloane admitted she had fallen in love with someone from her firm. She was already planning to move across the country with him. She apologized with tears in her eyes, but even as my life collapsed, a shameful part of me wondered whether fate had finally freed me to acknowledge what I felt for Maris. That hope disappeared when Maris stopped answering my calls. She believed approaching me after her sister's betrayal would be cruel and disloyal, and perhaps she was right. I was devastated, humiliated, and far too wounded to understand my own heart. Within a month, I left the city and accepted a job several states away. For the next 8 years, I became exceptionally good at being busy. I worked on hotels, office towers, and luxury homes for people who rarely seemed happy inside them. I earned promotions, bought an expensive apartment, and learned how to answer personal questions with polished jokes. I dated occasionally, but every relationship ended with the same quiet accusation. I was present, but never completely. I listened, but some part of me remained elsewhere, standing in a sunny backyard beside a paint-stained bench and a woman whose gentleness had frightened me more than rejection ever could. I followed Maris from a distance through social media until even that became too painful. I saw photographs of her teaching children, opening a small studio, standing beside murals she had helped create. Sometimes another man appeared beside her, and each time I felt a jealousy I had no right to feel. Then my mother became ill. Her surgery was not considered especially dangerous, but hearing fear in her voice stripped away the illusion that I had unlimited time. I flew home and spent 3 weeks helping her recover. During those slow daylight hours, while sunlight moved across the living room carpet and hospital instructions covered the kitchen counter, my mother began asking questions I had avoided for years. She asked whether I was happy. I gave her the answer people give when the truth is too complicated. I said I was fine. She studied me for a long moment and told me that fine was often the word people used when they had survived a life they never truly chose. Her words followed me everywhere. On the final weekend of my visit, my mother asked me to drive her to a neighborhood fundraiser. The Calder family was hosting it to raise money for a children's literacy program. I almost refused when I heard the name, but my mother needed help walking, and I could not disappoint her. The event took place in the Calder backyard under a clear afternoon sky. White tables covered the lawn, colorful paper lanterns hung from the trees, and families gathered beneath the sunshine. I had barely helped my mother through the gate when I saw Maris near the patio, arranging paintings for a silent auction. Time had changed her, but not in the ways I expected. Her chestnut hair was shorter, brushing just above her shoulders, and there were faint lines around her eyes that made her smile seem even warmer. She wore a burgundy sweater despite the mild weather and cream trousers marked with a tiny streak of blue paint near one pocket. For several seconds, I forgot how to move. Then she turned and saw me, her smile vanished. We exchanged a polite greeting that felt painfully formal. She asked about my mother, and I asked about her studio. Every sentence carried the weight of everything we were not saying. Before I could gather the courage to speak honestly, Sloane appeared from the house. She had returned to town after a second divorce and was helping her parents with the fundraiser. Seeing her did not reopen the wound I expected. Instead, I felt something close to gratitude. The life I once wanted with her seemed like a costume I had finally outgrown. Sloane pulled me into an awkward embrace and began talking about old times. She apologized again for what had happened, though her apology sounded practiced after so many years. I told her I had forgiven her, and I realized I meant it. Yet as we spoke, I kept watching Maris move through the yard. She carried boxes, guided children toward the craft table, and knelt to comfort a little boy who had spilled juice on his drawing. Her kindness had not faded. It had deepened. Later, I found her alone at a patio table sorting donation forms. Daylight warmed the side of her face. I sat across from her and asked why she had disappeared after the engagement ended. Her hands became still. She admitted she had been afraid of becoming another source of pain in my life. She had loved me then, but she believed confessing it would make her seem as though she were taking advantage of her sister's betrayal. She also believed I would never choose her freely because I had already chosen Sloane once. Her admission broke something open inside me. For years, I had imagined that my feelings were one-sided, an embarrassing secret preserved by distance. Now I understood that fear had stolen the same future from both of us. I told her about the yellow bench, the painting class photographs, and the way every relationship had been compared against the peace I felt beside her. She shook her head, fighting tears, and said I could not return after 8 years and turn nostalgia into love. She had built a life without me. She had learned not to wait, that I knew she was right. Love could not be proven by a dramatic confession alone. I apologized for arriving with emotions she had no obligation to carry. I told her I did not expect an answer, forgiveness, or a place in her life. Then Sloane called Maris from across the yard, and the conversation ended before I could say the one truth that had brought me there. For the next hour, I helped with the fundraiser. I moved chairs, handed out water, and repaired a loose wooden display. I planned to leave quietly, but near the end of the afternoon, Sloane approached me beside the garden. She had overheard part of my conversation with Maris. Instead of anger, she looked exhausted. She admitted that she had always known Maris cared for me. She had also known I became a different person around her sister, calmer, kinder, less desperate to impress anyone. Back then, Sloane had interpreted it as a threat and rushed the engagement partly because she feared losing me. Her confession was painful, but it also removed the last barrier I had allowed to stand between the truth and me. When I found Maris again, she was sitting at the patio table, watching children chase bubbles across the lawn. The late afternoon sun glowed through the trees, turning everything gold. I sat beside her and told her I was not asking her to erase 8 years. I was asking for one honest beginning. I admitted that I had once chosen security, image, and expectation over the person who understood me. Then, with my voice shaking, I said I regretted not choosing her. Maris looked toward the house where Sloane stood silently near the doorway. The sisters exchanged a glance filled with years of complicated love, resentment, and forgiveness. Sloane gave the smallest nod, not because Maris needed permission, but because sometimes healing begins when people finally stop competing with the past. Maris turned back to me. Her cheeks flushed, and a fragile smile trembled across her lips. She told me I still could choose her, but not the version of her I remembered. I would have to choose the woman she had become. I would have to show up slowly, honestly, and without disappearing when things became uncomfortable that I promised I would. That promise did not lead to an instant romance. It led to coffee the following morning at a sunlit cafe. It led to long walks through the city in the middle of the day, conversations about the years we had lost, and uncomfortable truths neither of us was allowed to avoid. Maris told me about the engagement she had ended because the man she loved wanted her to abandon her studio. I told her how ambition had become a hiding place. Some days, our history made everything harder. Other days, it made every ordinary moment feel miraculous. 3 months later, I transferred to my firm's local office. I did not do it as a grand gesture or demand that Maris interpret it as proof. I did it because I wanted a life rooted in people rather than achievements. I rented a modest apartment near my mother and began volunteering at Maris Art Center on Saturday afternoons. I was terrible with paint and even worse at keeping children from decorating my clothes, but Maris laughed more around me each week. The moment I knew she finally trusted me happened almost a year after the fundraiser. We were standing outside her studio on a bright spring afternoon after unveiling a community mural. Children and parents filled the sidewalk, taking photographs beneath the painted sky we had created together. Maris slipped her hand into mine without hesitation. There was no dramatic music, no crowd applauding our love, and no perfect speech. There was only sunlight, paint on our fingers, and the quiet certainty that neither of us was running anymore. 2 years later, I proposed beside the old yellow bench in her parents' backyard. The paint had faded, but Maris refused to let anyone replace it. I told her that bench marked the first moment I had glimpsed the life I truly wanted and the last moment I would ever allow fear to choose for me. She cried before I even opened the ring box. Sloane stood with the family near the patio, smiling through tears. Life had not erased what happened between us, but it had transformed it into something gentler. Forgiveness did not make us forget. It allowed us to stop bleeding from the memory. Maris and I married on a clear morning surrounded by family, friends, children from the art center, and more flowers than either of us had requested. When she walked toward me beneath the daylight, I did not see the woman I had failed to choose years earlier. I saw the woman who had chosen to trust me after I had finally learned how to be worthy of that trust. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be carrying an old regret, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Your support helps these stories reach people who still need to believe that healing and second chances are possible. Before the ending, please comment, "I will choose love over fear," as a promise to yourself that regret will not make your most important decisions. Some regrets cannot be undone, but they can still teach us how to live differently. I lost years because I was afraid to choose what felt real. Maris lost years because she believed love meant stepping aside. Yet when life gave us another chance, we did not waste it mourning the time behind us. We built something honest with the time still ahead. And every morning, when sunlight fills our kitchen and Maris smiles at me across the table, I remember the afternoon she blushed and told me it was not too late. She was right. As long as two hearts are still willing to be honest, the past does not have to become a prison. Sometimes the bravest choice is simply to stop running, turn toward the person who has always felt like home, and say, with no more fear and no more regrets, "This time, I choose you."